Ridley Scott is a very interesting director to talk about. If you ask me, the stylistic trait that has remained most consistent across Ridley Scott's career is his knack for world building. Whether he's making a sci-fi film, a historical epic, or a crime drama, Scott always has a talent for sucking you into the movie's world. Ridley Scott is also well known for crafting stunning visuals in his films and getting these bold, theatrical performances out of his actors. But, of course, I can't talk about Ridley Scott without addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, Ridley Scott is a bit of a hit-or-miss filmmaker. I know some think he's overrated, some think he's a has-been, and some even think he's a... However, the man has made some amazing and classic movies. I think it's also fair to point out that Ridley Scott doesn't write the screenplays to his movies, so his lesser movies have more to do with poor writing than poor directing. Though, if I had to come up with another explanation for his inconsistencies, as much as I love Ridley Scott's attention to world building, he can sometimes focus too heavily on it. This can result in some of his movies feeling lackluster and underwhelming, and Ridley Scott is at his best when his directing complements the story in a way that leaves an emotional impact. I don't want to rag on the man too much though, because I do like many of his films, and the fact that the man is still directing movies in his 80s is cool as fuck. Now that the intro's out of the way, let's take a look at a handful of Ridley Scott's most popular and most noteworthy films, starting with... The Duellists is Ridley Scott's directorial debut, and it's really impressive. It works as not only a showcase for Ridley Scott's trademark style, but it's also just a great film in general. The film is just about a rivalry between these two lieutenants who constantly try to best the other by, well, dueling. Why are these guys pissed at each other? Well, it's left vague, focusing instead on the absurd and barbaric nature of dueling as a whole. The cinematography is beautiful and the action scenes are brutal. The movie has some incredible world building that captures the setting of 1800s Europe remarkably well. These are aspects that Ridley Scott would excel at later in his career, so it's really cool to see him develop his trademark style through a film that had a relatively low budget of $900,000. The film is a little messy and does lull a bit in some parts, but overall, this is an impressive directorial debut that I'd recommend watching. Alien is my favorite Ridley Scott film. This is a pretty important film in the history of horror cinema. You see, before Alien, sci-fi horror films often looked like this.
Stop him, Turner! He's close enough! Turn off your electrode gun! No! No! Stop him, Turner!
I can't get it, it's jammed!
Stop him, you fool!
Drop the gun to the floor, Tanner. The metal will break contact.
That was too close.
So, Alien proved that it's possible to make a sci-fi horror film that isn't a cheesy B-movie and make one that's legitimately creepy. One of the most effective aspects of this movie from a horror standpoint is the concept. No, not the concept of a murderous alien, the concept of being trapped in space with a murderous alien. As the tagline suggests, in space, no one can hear you scream. It's not something that can simply be solved with, oh, why don't you just call the police? It's a concept that allows for so much tension and cosmic horror. The acting is phenomenal all across the board, and I love how the film doesn't have a proper protagonist until the second half. Ripley is a fantastic character and Ash is very mysterious. Also, the xenomorph's design created by H.R. Giger is just incredible. The atmosphere is so tense and terrifying. The practical effects are still insanely impressive. The cinematography is beautiful. The production design is immaculate, immersive, and claustrophobic. The music is beautiful and the sound design is eerie. Also, the chestburster scene is still awesome even to this day. Overall, this is one of the best horror movies ever made.
Ooh, which one is the real me?
Yeah, Blade Runner is incredible. The film is a loose adaptation of Philip K. Dick's dystopian novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. The film and the novel share the same basic premise, but go in very different directions with that premise. Harrison Ford gives a fantastic performance as Rick. Rutger Hauer gives an insane performance as Roy Batter, who is such an interesting and complex character. The cinematography and visuals are absolutely gorgeous. Seriously, this film has some of the best use of neon colors I've ever seen in film. The electronic score is so hauntingly beautiful, the world this movie creates is so imaginative, and the visual effects used to make the world come to life are breathtaking. The ideas that this movie presents about the future and life are really thoughtful. Also, this movie had a huge influence on the cyberpunk genre, which I think is really cool. That being said, in my opinion, I think Blade Runner 2049 is the stronger movie, mainly because there are some things regarding this movie that are a bit messy. If you don't know, upon the initial release of the film, the studio wanted to dumb down the movie by providing a voiceover. Harrison Ford half-assed the voiceover, thinking, if I do it bad enough, then the studio won't put it in. But the studio put the voiceover in anyways, which is pretty fucking funny. Ridley Scott hated the theatrical cut of the movie, so he released a director's cut that removed the voiceover, and then he released another director's cut called The Final Cut, which is the one that I watched. It's nothing too bad or confusing, you just have to make sure you're watching the right version. However, it's still a negative blight on an otherwise remarkable experience. It's an incredible mixture of sci-fi and neo-noir that I'd recommend watching if you haven't already. So, I don't really have much to say about Legend, to be honest. It's really cool visually, but pretty weak narratively. I'm telling you, this movie looks fucking gorgeous. The fantasy world this movie creates is so imaginative and colorful. I also love the metal-as-hell demon that Tim Curry plays, but man, I had trouble caring about the characters and the story of this movie. It's definitely a movie I'd call style over substance. It's not bad, but it's very, very mid. Thelma and Louise is just a really entertaining movie. There are many aspects of this movie to love. The performances from Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon are fantastic. The cinematography captures the desert landscape in a beautiful way. Also, the movie has a wide variety of memorable characters. However, the main reason this movie works so well just comes down to how fun it is. It has an enjoyable sense of humor, an engaging story, and two endearing main characters. It's a film that just feels like you're taking a fun road trip with a friend, journeying down the distant road and stopping by random places that look interesting. Also, the ending was just perfect. This is just an incredible and lovable movie that I'd highly recommend watching if you haven't already. Gladiator is such a badass movie. Russell Crowe gives a fantastic performance as Maximus, who is such a cool protagonist. A hero stricken with grief, fighting for his own freedom as well as his own happiness. Joaquin Phoenix is insane as Commodus, who is such a gross and despicable villain in the best way. The movie has such a grand scope with excellent set design and costumes that capture the time period really well. The action is wonderfully brutal and violent. That opening battle scene in particular is just legendary and such a great hook into the worlds of the story. Also, the score is beautifully triumphant. My only main issue with the film is the editing. Sometimes it's pretty good, but other times it's really choppy and dated. But overall, this is an incredible action film that I'd highly recommend watching if you haven't already. Black Hawk Down is a very intense and stressful movie. This movie captures the anxiety and the grotesque nature of war in a visceral way. Ridley Scott's technical wizardry is on point here. Beautiful cinematography, rhythmic editing, immersive sound design, and awe-inspiring scope. Honestly, from a filmmaking standpoint, this might be Ridley Scott's most impressive feat yet. The way the film cuts between the commanders coming up with strategy, the intense battles, and the helping of injured soldiers is just so good and keeps the film at a brisk pace throughout. I know some people have criticized the movie as being pro-war propaganda, but I disagree. I think the film takes a very similar stance as Saving Private Ryan. It's an anti-war film, but it still honors war veterans and all the horrific things they had to endure. There are certainly some films that just feel like they're romanticizing war, and I obviously don't like those films. However, I personally didn't find Black Hawk Down to fit into that category, though I will admit some of the depictions of Somalian people didn't age very well. Definitely a product of early 2000s America. However, I still found a lot to enjoy and appreciate about this film, and I'd recommend watching it if you haven't already.
So I found out the other day that my grandfather was a serial killer.
Hannibal is a very dull and goofy movie. The original Silence of the Lambs is a horror classic that's still very effective today. It's an unsettling look into serial killers being strange while still being grounded in reality. Hannibal, on the other hand, isn't unsettling at all. There are disturbing ideas in this movie, like a previous victim of Hannibal Lecter being deformed and a man's brain being eaten while the man is still alive. However, all of it is done in such an over-the-top way that it's nearly impossible to take seriously. Even Hannibal Lecter isn't that scary in this movie. That's nuts. Jodie Foster turned down the film, so they cast Julianne Moore to replace her. She does alright, but she's not nearly as effective as Foster. The entire film is also just very messy, with many weird creative decisions and plot beats that go basically nowhere. Yeah, if you like this movie, that's cool. Personally though, I think this movie's more like Silence of the Lame. Matchstick Men is just simply a solid movie. Nicolas Cage gives a fun and zany performance as Roy, which is a great contrast to Sam Rockwell's subtle yet still enjoyable performance as Frank. The relationship between Roy and Angelina Lohman's character has some charming chemistry. The editing in this film is very stylish and kinetic. The writing in this film is also really solid, especially in the way it bends genres. You could classify it as a dark comedy, but it's also relatively lighthearted. You could classify it as an intense heist movie, but it's also pretty laid back. Lastly, the movie ends on a pretty neat twist that just makes the movie feel like a complete package, for lack of a better term. Although I don't have any major flaws with the film doesn't do anything that I found particularly remarkable. It's still a great movie, but I guess I just wanted something more out of it. Kingdom of Heaven has a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes for some reason. Just another reason to not trust that dumb website. This film can certainly be messy at times, but its ambitious and awe-inspiring spectacle is too strong for me to dock the film too many points. On top of the film's grand scope, the cinematography is beautiful, the action scenes are engaging, and the performances are all fantastic. The film definitely feels reminiscent of 1950s historical epics like Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments. Don't have much else to say, it's just a great and overlooked movie that I'd recommend. American Gangster is a very good time, but a little underwhelming. It's definitely an engaging flick, and I don't have many major problems with the film. It has some very memorable moments, and it has some fantastic performances. Denzel Washington's performance is particularly incredible. However, I just don't see myself revisiting or reflecting on this movie anytime soon. I'd rewatch any Scorsese crime epic 5 times before giving this one a second watch. It's still a good film, but I was hoping for something stronger.
They're gonna lock you in!
God damn it, shut up!
He talked about it in my garden to like 3 other people. They're gonna lock you in the Red Robin and then go get all the Xboxes. That's why he wants you to stay back from the doors.
Well, why don't you just tell the whole world everything, huh? Why don't you tell everyone what Prometheus was about while you're at it? Did Kyle know about this? Dude, we're not gonna betray you, come on. Did you see Prometheus? I don't think the writers even knew what that was about.
Honestly, Prometheus wasn't as bad as I was expecting. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I ended up liking this movie. It's better than Alien 3 and Alien Romulus, that's for sure. Noomi Rapace and Michael Fassbender both give excellent performances in their respective roles. The cinematography is gorgeous, the visual effects look insanely real, and the way the film blends practical effects with CGI is just brilliant. The atmosphere the film builds is enticing. I also appreciate how the film returns to the sci-fi horror roots of the original Alien film while still taking the story in a completely new direction. Admittedly, I do understand why many people dislike this movie. The side characters aren't very memorable and most of them make pretty dumb decisions throughout the movie. I can also see why this film would be frustrating for some because the film presents itself as a prequel that will explain the backstory of the whole Alien universe when in reality the film ends up raising more questions than answers. Personally though, I liked the way the film touched on themes of faith and creation through this strange cosmic horror lens. It's far from a perfect movie, but I had a good enough time with it. It's nowhere close to the quality of the first 2 Alien movies, but it's a pretty enjoyable time for what it is. The Martian is a really entertaining movie. Matt Damon gives a great performance as Mark, who is a joyfully optimistic character. The rest of the performances from the all-star cast are really solid as well. The cinematography is gorgeous and captures Mars in an awe-inspiring way. The film has a very funny sense of humor, which was a very pleasant surprise for me. This film can also be pretty damn suspenseful at parts. The film and the Andy Weir book that the film is based on explore a very interesting concept, asking the question, what if someone was stranded on Mars? Also, as Neil deGrasse Tyson has pointed out, this film is actually very scientifically accurate, which I think is pretty cool. Neil deGrasse Tyson also pointed out that Garfield's cum can be used as an alternative fuel if you consider my asshole a vehicle. Why do people watch my videos? It's no masterpiece, but it's an amazing and engaging movie that I'd recommend watching if you haven't already. Alien Covenant is fucking stupid. This is my least favorite Ridley Scott film, and it's also my least favorite Alien film. I know not everybody liked Prometheus, but can we all at least agree that it was different and took risks? This movie, on the other hand, is so lame and predictable. Listen, I'm a big fan of the Alien franchise, but I just didn't give a fuck about this movie. The film is either really goofy or really boring. The characters are either really dumb or really unlikable. The horror aspects aren't scary and the action elements are lackluster. The CGI aliens look like ass. Also, what was up with the weirdly homoerotic scene with the two Michael Fassbenders? I mean, obviously there's nothing wrong with the homoeroticy of it. I mean, gay people are pretty cool and gay porn is pretty hot. It's just kinda weird when it's these two Michael Fassbenders and they're just teaching each other how to play the flute. I don't know, it's just weird. I guess the film has some pretty cinematography and the score is pretty great, but that's about it. Yeah, this movie is bad.
97 Toyota Camry. Only 32 made in the world.
House of Gucci is also bad. There are good aspects to this movie, like the cinematography and score are pretty good. However, the film is kinda similar to Alien Covenant in that much of this movie is just boring, and when it isn't boring, it's really goofy. The performances are super over the top to the point where everyone feels like a cartoon character, especially Jared Leto. The editing is weirdly silly at times. I think I know what the film was going for. I think it's trying to be a sex-fueled comedy drama about rich assholes in the same vein as something like Wolf of Wall Street. However, this movie is so fucking messy that it's honestly hard to tell if that was the point or not. I'm also not sure if Ridley Scott was the right person to direct this movie. I know his style of filmmaking is pretty flexible, but he just seems very out of his element here, which is probably the biggest reason why the film feels so off. One last thing, this movie's 3 hours long. Why? The Last Duel is pretty great. I'm not sure why this film bombed at the box office at the time of its release, but oh well. Matt Damon, Adam Driver, and Jodie Comer give great performances in this movie. The cinematography captures the grand scope of the story really well. The set design captures the time period of the film wonderfully. The score is beautiful and the sound design is immersive. The film also has many brutal and intense action scenes, with the ending duel being particularly engaging. Then of course there's the writing. The film utilizes a Rashomon-style story structure to show 3 different accounts of a sexual assault. Needless to say, this film is dealing with a horrific subject matter, but it treats that subject matter with respect. It's a film that showcases how deceitful the perpetrators of these horrific crimes can often be, as well as showcasing the barbaric ways people dealt with these types of crimes hundreds of years ago. That all being said, the writing in this movie isn't exactly perfect. The film has some dull moments from time to time, and the dialogue in this movie is pretty rough. There are some lines of dialogue that essentially act as a wink to the audience so that everyone knows this character is an idiot. That type of dialogue would work if it was played for laughs or satire, but it's played completely straight here. So yeah, it's a flawed movie, but I still really enjoyed it. If the subject matter of the movie sounds like it's too much for you, that's totally understandable. If not, I'd recommend checking it out if you're curious. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of Napoleon. I don't care about the movie's historical inaccuracies, it just should have been a more interesting movie. The film has some great moments, especially the admittedly impressive action scenes. The film also has some pretty good performances, particularly Joaquin Phoenix's performance as Napoleon. However, as a whole, this movie is just an empty character study and a boring failed attempt at awards recognition. I get what this movie was trying to do with its portrayal of Napoleon Bonaparte, painting him as a man corrupted by power to the point of becoming a huge narcissistic man-child. However, compare this movie to something like Barry Lyndon, a movie that Ridley Scott most likely took some inspiration from for this movie. Although the film also portrays Barry Lyndon as this huge narcissistic man-child, he still feels like a person. There's layers to his character and he's complex. In this movie, on the other hand, Napoleon is so pathetic to the point where he feels like a cartoon character. And don't get me wrong, Napoleon was an evil and power-hungry asshole in real life. However, without that depth and complexity, it results in the movie feeling empty. I also just don't like the way this film looks. Ridley Scott was really in the editing room like, wow, this shot looks beautiful, now mute the colors for no fucking reason. And on top of all that, much of the movie just isn't very engaging. The romance between Napoleon and Josephine just isn't interesting or well executed. I know this movie has its defenders, but I just couldn't get into it. Gladiator 2 isn't nearly as good as the original, but it's still a decent enough experience. The performances from Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal, and Denzel Washington are all amazing. The action scenes are brutal, fun, and creative. However, as everyone else has already pointed out, this film repeats way too much from the original film instead of trying to be its own thing. It's a legacy sequel that's fun and entertaining while you're watching it, but you're most likely never going to revisit it when you can just watch the original Gladiator instead. Also, the CGI effects weren't very good, looking like some shit out of a Dave & Buster's arcade game. So yeah, those are some of the films by Ridley Scott. Although I have my criticisms for some of his films, I do think the man is a very talented director. So put your fucking pitchforks down, put your angry comment away, or whatever. I'm a Ridley Scott fan, okay? I just like making dumb jokes and being cynical sometimes. If you're curious, here's my personal ranking and ratings on each film I watched. If any of these movies sound interesting to you, check them out. Next video, I'm talking about my microphone that broke just when I was about to finish recording the voiceover for this video, causing me to have to buy a new one just so I could finish the video. Subscribe or something like that. Bye bye.